Gen Z is closer to the Western culture. And at the same time, we're empowering ourselves with our culture as well, trying to find ourselves, defining our brand. We're moving off from the war, and now it's an emerging economics. And I also asked ChatGPT about, give me 10 words to describe Vietnam back then and now. And right now, there is no longer the word about poverty reductions. We don't talk about that anymore. We are the place that is attract foreigners to come to Vietnam.
Welcome to Season 11 of a Vietnam podcast with me, your host, Niall Mackay. I first came to Vietnam in 2015 for a vacation and absolutely fell in love with the place. Came back a year later for just 6 weeks to learn how to teach English, and that was in 2016, so it was over 8 years ago. There's something about Vietnam that just makes you stay here. There's an energy in Saigon especially that draws people in, and why it's become my home. Back in 2019, I started a podcast as a hobby. It was originally called a Saigon podcast and then became a Vietnam podcast. And that podcast was there just to share stories of people that are connected to Vietnam. And it's grown from then into something that I could never imagine. And now, 5 years later, we are here in season 11. So I'm really excited for my guest today. My guest today was born in Hai Dung up in the north. Now she lives in the south in Saigon, so she has a dual culture, so she knows better than anyone what it's like to be from the north and the difference between the south, because they are very, very different from what I know. She works for a global tech company called NFQ based here in Saigon, and she wants to showcase Vietnamese talent to the world about how innovative it can be. And she also wants to help elevate Vietnam and showcase the social responsibility that young people can take on board. So I'm really excited to introduce today from NFQ, Jessie Nguyen. Thank you very much for coming on a Vietnam podcast.
Thank you, Niels. Welcome to NFQ.
We are here in the NFQ recording, and you guys have an amazing office. It's one of these places that I've driven by so many times, and then you introduced me to it, and it's like, wow. Which brings me to what I think Vietnam is today, because I think it's so easy to drive by. And I mean, even where I live, we see water buffaloes, there's rice paddies. People think of Vietnam as a war-torn country. They think of it as a third world country, which really pisses me off when I see people in comments on Facebook and talk about Vietnam being this poor country. Obviously, it has poor elements to it, like many countries do. Many other countries have massive homelessness problems and other issues that Vietnam doesn't face. So you want to help change that perception of Vietnam to the world through technology. So what you want to do is elevate Vietnam's position in the world as innovators in technology, which I personally think is incredible because I see the potential here in Vietnam. I see firsthand the amazing things that people are doing that you might drive by every day and you don't even notice it. How do you plan to do that? Tell us, how is that happening?
Well, I may ask you first, what is your first impressions about Vietnam as compared to your imagination?
Man, it was so long ago. It's difficult. I mean, so what's really difficult to answer that question is because I came as a tourist, and so it pretty much fulfilled those examples because we went to the rice paddies and we went to the Mekong Delta and we saw people with the conical hats on, and we went to Boy Vien probably. Did we go to Boy Vien? I hope not. Maybe we did, but we drank cheap beer. So to be honest, it did fulfill a lot of those stereotypes. The only reason that I harp on about this so much is because in my position as an expat who's been here for so long, I can see that Vietnam is not what you think it is. And one of the reasons I bring it up often as well is one of our first guests was Lewis Wright. And was it Lewis or was it someone else? Sorry if I'm forgetting who it was. But he talked about how people back home would ask him like, oh, is it all like thatch huts and rice paddies and buffaloes? And there's one of the comedians on the circuit when I was doing comedy, Tommy. He had a really funny joke about when he would call his dad and his dad would hear like bikes in the background, like in the motorbikes, and his dad would be like, what's that, a helicopter? Like, which obviously many, many people overseas probably would think, yeah, was that a helicopter? No, there's no helicopters. There's no war machines going about. It would just be traffic. So I think it's more over time that I've noticed that it's changed. What was it like for you growing up in Hai Dung?
I was born and raised in the countryside. So yes, you're right. There are buffalo and rice paddy fields, and that's That's a beautiful road that I walk to school every day, 1 kilometers. And yes, I walk past the rice paddy fields. That's how I grew up. And then when I was 15 years old, my whole family moved to Ho Chi Minh City, which is, I might say, this is a whole new world. It's a whole new world. And up to now, I still believe that Ho Chi Minh City is the most like dynamic city of Vietnam. But then back when I was in primary school, people was talking about Vietnam is about poverty reductions. And we talk a lot about the war, which is the concept of the word about Vietnam. For tourism, I had a conversation with my friend from Australia, and he said that, yeah, before, I don't want people to remember Vietnam just about banh mi and pho. Yes, there's some data about that. In 2000, we are ranking about the 60th somethings across the 195 countries. And right now, if you're checking back, Vietnam is ranking on the 33rd in terms of nominal GDP. And we check with our purchasing power, Vietnam is like 26th. It's the economic context is now changing. And it doesn't make, so yeah, people have different concepts about different countries. When we talk about America, we talk about superpower. We talk about you watched Captain America, right? It's the kind of vibe that I want to save the world and all. When we talk about China, we talk about like ancient stories, like the king and those kind of movies. And we also see China as the factory of the world. So different concepts about different countries. And Vietnam, I want to move away completely. We are in the new chapter. We are moving off from the war, and now it's an emerging economics. And yeah, I also asked ChatGPT about, give me 10 words to describe Vietnam back then and now. And right now, there is no longer the word about poverty reductions. We don't talk about that anymore. We also don't talk about agriculture, yes, but not the most like dominant information, but more like about the technology, innovation hub that we are the place that is attract foreigner to come to Vietnam. And I think that there is some reason for that. So about the economic in general, and especially for my company, my current company, we talk about the entrepreneur mindset. So you might see that in Vietnam, there's a lot of people. You meet 10 people and then like 7 or 8 out of them, they are having their own business. They're running a side business or something. So we don't mind to being the owner of our life and starting something on our own. And that entrepreneur's mindset actually is really nice if you apply it into work context and all, because you can take ownership of the things that you are doing.
No, that's so interesting about the entrepreneurial spirit, because that is something that you hear about Vietnam a lot. And I remember even when we first came here, it's been nine years ago, we were up in Hanoi, and what was pointed out to us as an example of the entrepreneurial spirit was there was a guy just on the side of the road with like a bucket of 10 beers and selling them to people walking by. And I remember a friend who was with us at the time was like, this is what I'm talking about. Like, he needs to make some money, so he just goes and buys some beer and then he's going to sell them for a little bit more. Like, Vietnamese are full of the entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, I might say it's not that difficult to start a business in Vietnam if you compare to Japan or Singapore. It's much, much harder. So in Vietnam, a lot of people coming here to set up their new business. And also we're talking about the mindset that we apply in basically everything we do. My friends, also the CEO of the company, he say that when he went into any interview, he said he's going to become the CEO of the company, because yeah, that's basically the mindset that we should have when we do anything.
So what changed or not changed, what has happened or developed in Vietnam over the last 20 years that has led to that confidence and that entrepreneurial spirit of, I'm going to be the CEO?
We're talking about the thing that haven't changed. Across 20 years, we're still talking about how friendly we are. We're super friendly to foreigners who come to our country, super like welcoming all of them going to the country. And still until today. It is not because we are a tourism country. I don't think that. It's coming from the people, and we value relationships. And to us, like we have been born and we have been raised like relationship is the most valuable access that you have in life.
I want to go back to when you said about you moved from the north to the south. So what were the biggest differences that you noticed? You mentioned that the dynamism here and the energy. How old were you when you moved?
15 years old.
Wow. So that's a really like your formative years, you're settled in the north. What were the biggest things you noticed in terms of the people and the different ways that things are done?
Give it an example. I compare the US and the UK. So the northern people is more like the UK people, where things is a bit more subtle, had like it's many layers of meanings when a person says something. And actually, we care a lot about how other people perceiving myself. In the southern is in another, it is more flexible and it's easier for us to show ourselves and show our personalities and just be ourselves better. So it's also like in the north, if you're living in the neighborhood, everyone gonna know you, and they will know if you are the stranger. They will know, and there are some cases that it's a funny story. I tell my family in the north. I say there's a case. The family they went to a holiday, and there is some thief came over. They just came in with a truck, like they cut the house, they bring everything out, and nobody knows. Like all the neighbors think, oh, so another family changed. Oh, so they are moving house. That's it. And things like that couldn't happen. I mean, yeah, or maybe it's because up north, I was not in that kind of big cities, but that's the spirit. Another example, a northern people, when they invite you, like, let's have lunch with us. When we have a talk, right? They say, oh, it's lunchtime. Let's have lunch with us. Then we need to let them ask 3 times. Or they may say, no, I mean it. Have lunch with us. Yes, and that's when you know. But normally when you finish the chat and people, let's have lunch with us. And then the thing you should say is, well, I had my plan. And they say, no, I mean it. Let's have lunch with us in that.
Wow. So if they ask once and then you say no, then and they go, okay, that they didn't really mean it.
It's like a way of greeting people. All I say if we are talking and then another people eating something, I say, let's enjoy it with us. And you feel it's super awkward if you're eating something and you're not inviting other people. But you need to really sense whether this is a real invitation or it's just like, yeah, being polite.
When you came to the south, did people treat you any differently being from the north? Could they hear your accent?
Oh, right. That's the thing. Well, my cousins, who is much, much older than me, they say that there is a poem in Vietnamese that's saying like, the southern people don't like the northern people and they're making fun of it. Yeah, because of the background after the war, then northern people moved to the south and things happened in the past. So I was a little bit afraid. And there I picked up my southern accents. And actually right now normally I speak to colleagues and friends in the southern accent. So if a mom call me and I pick up with my northern accent, it's a different person. If I picked up the phone and my friend will look at me like, what? Are you my friend?
This is amazing because it's one of these things that no matter where you go in the world, people are all the same, right? So my dad, his mum is from like the north of Scotland. And so they have a very distinctive accent as well. And they have their own language. My dad couldn't speak that language. He just spoke English because he was born and brought up in the south. But every time he got on the phone to his mum, same thing, he'd be like, oh, hello, how are you doing? Are you okay? Did you have a good cup of tea? And he would suddenly put on this, we'd call it like a Chukter accent is how you would call it, but he'd put on this northern accent, but he couldn't even speak the language. And same thing, we'd be like, Dad, what? Wait, you don't sound like that. You've completely changed your voice. So it's so funny, even like massive generation were thousands and thousands of miles away and you still do the same thing.
Yeah, it used to be one of my insecurities. And there are some different words. So in the southern, the word, the bell, is meant that the rubber band. In the north, it same word but different meanings. And there is one time I asked my friend, do you have the rubber band? But the word actually they hear is like, do you have a bell? And they say, why do you need a bell for your hair? They say, It's normal. And only cái cọng dây, they say the cọng dây dây nịch, which means the belt in the south, but it means the rubber band in the north.
Well, even though in English languages, like in America, they call them pants and we call them trousers in the UK. So I have had confusion when I've said to somebody about, like, do you have your pants? And then said it to an American, and then the British person thought I was asking, like, do they have their underwear? And I was like, no, I'm asking, like, do they have their pants? So, like, can get confusing like that as well.
This is the thing that applicable for the language as well. When I compare the US and the UK, I mean it. When the US, they say sidewalk, which means walking on the side. And the UK is like pavement, the pavement. So same for Vietnamese language. The words we are using, the sound is much more describable. When you hear the word, even that's the first time you hear the word, you still understand. But for Northern people, we have different noun for different things.
So did you find that you faced any discrimination when you first came and you had a clear Northern accent before you changed? Did people pick on you, or did you feel like people looked on you different because you were from the North?
No. It's just in my mind. So we suffer in our imagination more than in reality. I fear that, but then my friend was all super nice and they really liked my accent back then. But then it's still my insecurity, so I changed time by time. But right now, sometimes I surprise my friend by speaking the Northern accent.
Well, like what you just said there about, someone told me recently, we think people care about us more than they really do. So we get, like, in our mind, we're like, oh, what do they think about us? And it's like, most people don't think about you. They don't care about you. They only care about themselves. So you don't really need to worry. But the reason I'm asking partly is, do you think that if it was the opposite, so someone from the South went to the North, they would face discrimination or something similar? Because what I've heard, I remember talking to a Vietnamese friend many years ago, and I said, oh, I heard that foreigners get ripped off a lot, but I've actually never really experienced it. In all my time, maybe I've been charged, you probably heard of, like, the foreigner price, that you maybe go and get your bike fixed and they charge you a little bit more. Maybe they have, but if they have, it's not been enough to make me, like, think, oh my God, I'm being ripped off. But when I told her this and I said about the foreigner price, she said, oh, no. It's worse if you're from the South and you go to the North. And I've heard this from several friends from Saigon, that one of them told me a story. They were in the North and they sat down and got a bowl of pho. Pho's like probably 30K, maybe 40K, 25, something like that, quite low, right? But they didn't have a price up. And because they heard his accent, they said 150K for a bowl of pho. And he was like, no, I'm not paying that. And they were like, no, 150K, that's it. And he had to pay. And so I've heard that you face more discrimination as a Vietnamese person than as a foreigner.
Well, no, for that, I didn't experience that, because maybe I was lucky enough to having facing this kind of bad experience. And also I pretend sometimes I keep my Northern accent and then testing people, but they just like, oh, you sound so nice, and they're just like being mesmerized with the other accent. So for me personally, I don't, or maybe the younger generation, I mean in general. So people is like talking about Gen Zs and the differences of Gen Zs and millennial and other baby boomers generation, for example. But I think we are living in a much more flatter world. Like right now, the cultures and only exchange between countries and peoples, and like, so that things is, maybe it happened a lot in the past, but nowadays I believe that this better. It's getting better and better. So this led me to another thing about technology, because if in the beginning I may say 20 years ago, people thinking English as something nice to have. And if you have English, so maybe you get better job opportunities or something. But nowadays, I do believe that English is the most. Like, kids supposed to study that at school, and then when you are university, when you graduated, without English, you are like below average. Yeah.
Well, I heard that you can't graduate anymore unless you have a certain English score. Is that true?
Yes, to my understanding, that's it. But it's now become more like a must. Yeah. And at school, we learned English in the official education schedules, like ever since grade 6, which means 11 years old for now. So that is one of the most thing, and I think that helps. If you look back into the concept of economics, then you see that the reason why Singapore is growing so fast is because part of the reason is because of the language, and communication is much more easier when they're speaking English. And I believe that Vietnam, like the strategy is pretty much going the same. And like 2 or 3 years ago, I asked myself the same question. I read a book about technology, and I have the realization that technology is right now is going on the same path. Like there is no longer, oh, I'm not a tech person, I'm not a high tech person anymore. You can't get yourself out of technology. So this is the must, and this is a language that sooner or later you need to pick up on.
Now, you mentioned about Gen Z, and I want to talk about that because I'm not going to lie, up until about 6 months ago, I don't even think I'd heard of Gen Z. And I know as a millennial, I'd heard a lot about millennials. This is from a Western perspective. Millennials are the worst. We spend too much money on avocado on toast and things like this. And all the world's problems are millennials. But I never really thought about generations before. I just thought we're all people. I didn't really think about like generations. But now as I'm getting older and I started to realize like, oh, this person's 24 years old. And they have a completely different outlook on life to me, or not a completely different outlook, but a very different outlook. Especially for me, I noticed, when I was brought up, there were homosexuals, but that was banned. You couldn't get married. Most people didn't come out. It was scandalous. If you were bisexual, that was even stranger because nobody admitted to being bisexual. But now 24-year-olds have been brought up in this world of sexuality as a spectrum. LGBTQ plus is way more accepted. So these are all great things, but it's made me realize that they've been brought into like a completely different world to what I was brought into. And then we can go into all the financial aspects and not how about they have to pay for university and all of these things as well. So Gen Z are obviously, they're kind of like, I feel like the in thing right now, maybe, and you can talk more about that from marketing because everyone wants to market to Gen Z. That's all I hear about. Like, how do we market to Gen Z? How do we reach out to them? What does that mean in Vietnam? Is it the same worldwide? Because I do hear about Gen Z in Vietnam as well, which are the younger generation, obviously. Is there a Gen Z in Vietnam? Are they the same as the Gen Z in the West? And how is the new, younger generation of Vietnamese different to the one before them?
I can always speak on that with my personal perspective again.
Are you Gen Z?
Yes, I'm Gen Z.
I'm a gentleman. I haven't asked your age yet, so I didn't know what you... I presumed you were 97. I'm so old.
Well, there are some things with my observation, I may think Gen Z nowadays is... So I got the feedback from my previous manager that Gen Z is so strange. I don't understand. Your guys are so strange. So in work context, so in the work context, we are less hierarchy. So to me personally, I don't buy in with the concept of boss and employees and staff in general. To me, everyone is colleague, and that's lead to a thing that I respect my team as my colleague. I have people from my team who are 2003. Yeah, it's much younger than me as well. But
just quickly, you said 2003 and I'm doing the maths. I'm like, they must be like, that's like 16 years old. And I'm like, holy shit, at 21 years old. I'm so old, as I said, but on you go, continue. 2003, 21 years old.
Yeah. So that is, but I try my best to value them as not as because they're younger or older, but seeing them at who they are. And also the same thing go with my line manager as well. So sometimes I positioning him or her as a colleague where I can like directly share our thoughts. And also this kind of thing with, if you mentioned about hierarchy, then in Japan or Korea, that thing is still a dominated like kind of mindset when you go to corporate. But in Vietnam, I think that's the new concept that we have to pick up on. And we care a lot more about equality. And I'm not sure if the Gen Zs in European side is much more different. But moving to Asian side, because the world is flatter right now. So we are picking up this kind of culture much, much faster. And so I may say that Gen Z is closer to the Western culture. And at the same time, we are empowering ourselves with our culture as well, trying to find ourselves, defining our brand. So I don't see a lot of people in millennial and baby boomer generation talking a lot about themselves. They're more talking about the communities or their bigger, like the bigger group, and they seeing them as part of the bigger group, and always that way. And it's feel a bit weird if you're talking about ourselves, but for Gen Zs, yes, we are supposed to define our personality, and each person is very much different.
That makes so much sense, because what I've noticed as an elder millennial, I almost feel like a boomer when I say things like this, but what I've noticed from Gen Z is they love labels. They love to label themselves. They have to have like something that defines them. And I feel like my generation, we didn't need that. We were just, I mean, we did to a way, like my friends all followed Oasis. We loved indie music, but we never really defined ourselves like that. But maybe we did. Maybe I'm just not remembering. But I have noticed that every Gen Z person needs an individual label, like they're something different. But what I was going to ask though is that not a huge clash of cultures in an Asian country like Vietnam or Korea or Japan? Because they are very hierarchical. And I know this from the business that I do here as well, and working with companies, that one thing I was told recently is, and probably not the Gen Z generation, maybe the elder generation, they might be like, say, the director of marketing, which sounds like a big fancy title, but they have no decision-making abilities because the hierarchical structure of the past goes that their manager is the big boss. So this person seems like they're the boss, but they actually don't have any decision-making power. And what somebody told me recently was, you might have a meeting where everyone will be like, yep, no, that's a good idea. Yep. And then after the meeting, they'll be like, oh, that was a terrible idea. That's never going to work. But they'll never tell their manager that it was a bad idea, because those structures are so ingrained in a lot of Asian cultures that you basically have to do what your elders tell you. So you think that's changing with Gen Z, but do you think it's changing like immediately? Because I feel like that's going to take a couple of generations for that kind of hierarchical structure, and especially patriarchal as well, because it's very much male dominated, right? Like you've got to do what your elder male says. I still feel like that's going to take a couple of generations to change, or do you think that's changing already?
I think it changed already. And so let me give an example. In my previous company, we were talking about, we have designers discussing with the founder of the company about, no, I don't think that we should using this font for our website because it doesn't look like up to the standard. And then the founder say, but we are at the point we need to compromise because the timeline is very rushed and I can't wait anymore. And then the designer just say, I'm sorry, but you need to listen to me. And this is the kind of thing that I would never compromise out my work. But this kind of story doesn't happen a lot in like kind of previous older generations culture. And then our founder, he's 70 something already. Yes, but he's very much respect that. And he say, okay, so we try the best to deliver the best quality within the time frame. And another time, there is the time that the website is not going well. And then he wrote an email with the yellow background highlight, yellow background, red caps lock text, take it down now in the weekend. Yeah. And then on Monday, he printed out a paper, same treatment of text with yellow highlighted and red text, caps lock say sorry. And he put it on her desk. And that's how a 70 years old like businessman, business owners treat his employee. And I learned from that. So I think that this is not something that it's just that in the back of our head, we believe that it's supposed to be that way. But actually everyone can change and adapt in that way. And I might not say which one is better, because if we go back to the concept of military and like hierarchical, so that helps when it's in the situation where we need to respect people who make decisions.
Now, do you think that's changed because, like you mentioned, the world is flatter? So I assume you don't mean the world is a flat earth. I assume that's not what you think. You mean like it's more homogenous, right? So like we all think the same things? Because the question I want to ask is, I've worked in the public school system here. I know what it's like. It's 50 children, sometimes 54 children in a class. They're not getting taught so much like creativity. They're not getting taught lateral thinking. They're not getting taught about international studies. They're getting taught the subjects really well, like math, science, English. So it's not like the most expansive education from what I can see. And that's not changed because I was teaching in public school like a year ago. So the public education here has not changed. And the schools are massive. You know, I've been in a classroom, 54 students in one classroom, and then there'll be 10 classrooms on the one floor and then 5 floors. So you're like, that's, can't even do the math. It's like 2,500 children or something like that. And then across the road, there'll be another school like right next door. So there's thousands and thousands of young Vietnamese all going through this education. How do they then come out with this Gen Z mindset and this non-hierarchical, if that's a word, non-hierarchical thinking, because they're not being taught it in school?
No, that's a tough question. I haven't think about that. I don't think I can answer the question because actually the non-hierarchical thing is more applicable for me, myself. And with my observation, with my experience, my own experience. So I'm not sure. I'm really not sure about it.
Well, because the world is flatter, like you say, they're more exposed to social media. And I think one of the big differences about Vietnam is, and maybe where there's a misconception from overseas, is it's a one-party government or communist country, but it's not like other countries like China. It's not freedom. Vietnam is still a very free country and very innovative and moving forward quickly. So I just wonder, where are Gen Z learning these new traits? And that's what goes back to my point. I just wonder if it will happen quick enough. But is it exposure to companies, these Western companies that are coming in with a different type of mindset and different owners?
I don't think that we are adopting this with the Western mindset. Actually, we are exposed to these cultures more, and we are exposed to the world much more than ever before. And we learned, we get things from outside, but actually we reflect back to ourselves as well, and only things that is true to ourselves that can sustain. So eventually, regardless of how much information you get from outside, it will come back to the true natures of human being, and we need to ask ourselves the same thing. So I have a concept from my own about learning. I call it blinding flashes of the obvious, which means that normally you don't learn things from outside. You just get information from outside, but the thing that you really learned is from the obvious. And some of the obvious is like in your blind spot that you can't see that. And that's helped a lot. So that is the thing where it's going to the point where we talked about personal branding and we talk about we're trying to labeling ourselves and defining ourselves. So isn't that the question that the other generation also asked themselves as well? But the situation, I might say that the context of Vietnam many years ago where we need to struggle with the economic situations and earning, like try to make a living. And also we don't really have time to define the purpose of life. But for younger generation right now, we have been raised up in the environment which is like enough for them to think back and define that. Why do I exist here? And what do I want to do with our life? And also, I may say that this comes from within.
Well, and this is what's exciting about the massive economic change in Vietnam, because once you don't have to worry about a roof over your head and where your next meal is going to come from, and you can start to have a little bit more money to plan for the future, then you can start to have these more kind of existential questions, I guess, in your life. So you are a really great example of that changing generation, and obviously the way you think as well and the way you act. So you're the marketing manager at a global tech company. How did you get that position? And this is what I think is just so amazing, because people think of Vietnam as rice paddies and non-la hats. And maybe that's what your family did. I don't know, I haven't asked. But you're now working for an amazing company and showcasing what Vietnam can do to the world. How did you end up here?
Wow, this is really nice. So before, my background is on branding and sustainability. And I talked to my mentors, I talked to my friends that I want to do marketing for a tech company because I believe in the tech awesomeness, the impact that technology can make, and actually is create abundancy for people. Because as human being, we have 8-hour day. We have limited like capacity of health, and also to creating value, we need a bridge. We need an enabler. And I believe that technology can help people with that. And that is so amazing. And yes, so that's a must for me. And then I just keep going on that path and looking. And then I got referred to this role by my mentor. And once I come in, the question I was asked is, what is my vision and what's my purpose? And I say, well, I believe in creating impact. And I believe that with this role, I can do that.
And so why do you think that Vietnam is now a hub for innovation and technology that, again, many people, and that's not their fault because they live thousands of miles away, they probably don't know. Why do you think that Vietnam has now become this destination for innovation and technology?
During the COVID-19, I might see that like different countries have their own team to try to think out the process of how to treat like COVID patients and all. So in the beginning, we do that very well. And it's because of our flexibility and the ability to adapt with things. And we just try, learn, test, and make new things. And that is in the mindset, like the entrepreneur mindset I share with you. So that is one thing. The second thing is I believe technology is not difficult. So the things that is complex and difficult is the mindset. It's not about technology itself. Basically, you can build anything, like all the complex software, all the complex website and all, you can basically finish that within 9 months or 1 year's maximum. So everything is buildable. And the point is about the people behind, the concept behind, the solution behind, whether it's good enough to sustain, the idea behind whether it's strong enough, or can we foresee the experience of people using that, and can we foresee that the impact that we can make with these solutions. So that is the core thing about technology, and technology is just an enabler for us to doing amazing things. And with that, I'm very much confident that Vietnamese is one of the best. And we're being so creative ever since back when in the time that of the war. So I don't want to bring back all the kind of information, but if you visit Củ Chi, you know that how creative we are.
Gucci. Oh, Gucci. I thought you said Gucci, like the fashion house. And I was like, oh, wait, did Vietnamese people design Gucci? I didn't know that. Gucci, you're talking about the way they designed some weapons that were very innovative and grotesque as well at the same time. But we won't go into that too much. But that's really interesting. So you think that, going back, that entrepreneurial mindset, even if you're not an entrepreneur, has led to this type of innovation in Vietnam. So how do you think Vietnam compares then to other Southeast Asian countries like the Philippines? I would say they're almost in a similar, or maybe a little bit more further ahead in terms of countries' development than Vietnam. What makes Vietnam different to these kind of countries that sets them up, I think, really well, that makes a lot of people want to do business here? And just, I'm answering my own question here, which I hate when interviewers do that, and I hate when I do that. But I do a lot of work with podcasts for businesses, and the thing I hear all the time is businesses do set up in Vietnam because there are lower labor costs, right? That's just a fact, right? But there are other countries with similar labor costs that don't have the same skills as Vietnamese people. And the reason companies come here is not just the lower labor costs, it's because of the Vietnamese workforce.
Exactly. I hate to mention, actually, I never use the words low labor costs in any of our communicating materials. And we don't position ourselves at, we can provide things cheaper. But I buy in with the concept of cost effective. It's more about when you compare an iPhone with Oppo, for example, you may see that the definition of cost effective is when you build something and it's sustained, it's simple enough that building simple things is very difficult. But if it's simple enough and it's able to sustain and deliver the value and getting into the essence of things, and that is where we build things with value, but we do it one time and it's sustained for longer. And that's the concept. And yeah, so I try to move away from the cost-effective things. And so far right now, I might say that Vietnam is not that cheap anymore.
And I did that thing I hated where I answered my own question that people come to Vietnam for the workforce. So I guess though, to try and make my question clearer, what makes Vietnamese workforce, Vietnamese young people doing business in Vietnam different to doing business with another country where it's a similar price point?
We are resilient. We are receiving that trait from our older generations, that we still have that kind of resilience, and at the same time creative and adapting new things. And it's a combination. And Vietnam in general is like geographically is in the position where it's very much convenience for us to adopt new culture and all. And the fact itself that it's the tourism country as well, and you see a lot of expat and foreigner living in Vietnam, which make us much more inclusive in the kind of international cultures and all. So that is, I may say that is some of the key things.
Well, you mentioned something about things not being cheap, right? Or you don't want things to come across as cheap, so this is such a good discussion, because just because something's cheap, I mean, in my mind now, if something's cheap, it means it's poor quality. And so we don't want Vietnam to be compared with, oh, it's cheap, because that to me just means it's poor quality, right? And I had somebody approach me recently wanting to do some work with me to help create a podcast. And I'll be really honest, it was one of the rudest messages that I've ever received. And it was like off the bat, it was like, I don't have any money to spend, but I want you to help me make my podcast so that I can make money, and then I'll pay you once I make money, which is not how any business in the world runs. But what annoyed me the most was he said, well, you know, I know you're in Vietnam and it's really cheap there, so I assume that you'll give me cheap prices. And I mean, anyone who pays any attention knows I just won an award for Best Audio Producer of the Year. I'm very good at what I do, and my team are very good at what we do, and we base our prices based on the quality of the work that we provide. And the more I thought about it, I was like, would you go into a phone shop and say, I want to buy the new iPhone, but I want it cheaper because I know it's made in Vietnam?
Mm-hmm. Making sense.
You'd never ever do that in a million years. So it was just one of the most infuriating conversations I've had with somebody. And I tried 2 or 3 times to say, like, I don't want to work with you. And he kept coming back to me. And I think he eventually took the hint, because I was like, I'm not going to help you work for free. And I had to bite my tongue. I actually typed out a message to be like, I find you very rude. And then I deleted it because I was like, I'll just leave it. But just that mindset was crazy. And I think a lot of people have that mindset about Vietnam. So how does Vietnam change that mindset?
I don't know. I mean, like for me, it's just come naturally. So me and my friend, I joined an exchange in 2019. We visit Singapore, visit Thailand, top company. And we might say that, so we have some group discussions and all. We will say the only barrier at that time is possibly the language. I might not compete to Singaporean where they use English on daily basis, but the rest, I don't think we are that, like, we don't position ourselves lower. So it's just come naturally. Yeah, it doesn't need to be changed, but it's just come naturally.
Well, do you think that as the quality does increase, so for example, like so much like coding and building things, like now Apple does have factories here, Adidas have factories here, they create these material objects that aren't cheap to buy, and they're not cheaply made, and so people might eventually start to. One of the best examples I can think of is Nguyen Coffee Supply in New York, right? So I've interviewed Sarah before a few years ago. She's the founder of this company. She's Vietnamese American, born in America, and she is on a mission to change the way people perceive Vietnamese coffee, because Vietnamese coffee is a great example. So Robusta is the main type of coffee that Vietnamese that is grown and sold from Vietnam. Because coffee's cheaper and it's higher yield, the coffee's not as good. So it's mostly used for instant coffee and cheap brands of coffee. The good stuff, the Arabica, is grown in small quantities, but it has a higher price because it takes longer to grow, right? So I know a little bit about the coffee industry. So what she's trying to do is help, and others as well, I know as well, like CAF, I think, are doing a lot of great work as well. It's trying to change that. And it's hard for the mindset of Vietnamese farmers to be like, hey, you can grow Robusta and you grow it really quickly, but sell it cheap so you can get cash quickly. Or you could sell Arabica. It's going to take longer to grow, so you're going to have to wait longer, but you can sell it for higher. That's a really difficult choice to be like, do you want less money now or more money later, when you might need money now? But they're working to try and change that perception that Vietnamese coffee is cheap. and help move it into a stage where Vietnamese farmers can produce really good coffee and get paid well for it.
Yep, that's the mindset about, because I might say that if we talk about cheap price, we can't compete China. We can't. That's the factory of the world. So, and I don't want to position ourselves in that way. So it's about the quality as well. And it's the mindset that we're doing things is the best. So there's a story that a guy, they came into the room and they asked a group of people of a young startup. They say, what is your strategy to become the best, the top 20 biggest company, like globally? And they say, what are you talking about? We're just 20 people and we don't even earn $1 billion a year. Then why are you asking these kind of questions? And the guy say, no, but Facebook start with that small group of people. Microsoft start with that small group of people, and they started with, they don't even have enough money to pay for everyone, and they pay by shares. But that should be the mindset. We start everything, and it's linked to the point where we talk about the mindset of the CEO before we do everything. So taking ownership of things we do and taking in charge of the quality and the final impact that we create with the thing we do. And I may say that, wow, if we think that we try to please our stakeholders, we try to please our boss, they might not much inspiring of the work that we are doing right now in general, but we try to think about the impact that we can make with every single word that we're writing, with every single line of code that we're doing right now, and think how many people are going to use that in the future. So that is the point where it makes difference.
I have one final question about Gen Z to go back. The stereotype for Gen Z, I read this, just somebody posted this yesterday. They don't want to work. They don't want to do anything. They're lazy. They have a bad attitude. But everything we've talked about Gen Z would be the opposite. So how do you reconcile those two facts? Which one is true, or are they both true?
I have a different belief about that. I might say that we are more purpose-driven. So Gen Z is more purpose-driven. And so when going to the point of purpose, then it's dividing people into different groups. And I might say everyone has different purpose in life. So for those who believe that I was born to enjoy this life, then they will have their own agenda. And they don't mind speaking up their agenda and their purpose. And for people who say, I'm born to do this thing and this is the thing that I can do the best, and I believe that I can do this much better than other people as well. So I'm the best person to do this job. So that's another mindset. So I might say that the thing that you may be right that we are more purpose driven and we are living for ourselves more. So we don't mind to speak up, and that's why you see that we are much more like straightforward as compared to the other generation. But it's also because the economic situation as well. We were born to not much of us suffering from hunger on a daily basis when we were young as compared to the older generations. So we had more time to think about the purpose in life.
I love that. That's such an amazing way to put it, purpose-driven. I've not thought of that specific phrase, but I mean, I think the same thing as well. I'm like, why they don't want to work a job for 40 years, 9 to 5, and they'll probably get fired a year before retirement. It's like the mindset is completely changed. So anytime I do see somebody, normally a boomer, ranting about like young people don't want to work, you're like, no, they just don't want to do the jobs that exist. They want to do different jobs. They want to do jobs that have more meaning. They want to do something that feels more valuable. They don't want to go work in an office and work 9 to 5. I mean, so for my team, like we don't have set hours. Everybody just works anytime they want, when they want, just as long as they do the tasks. And that's always been my mindset. And I remember when my last job before I came to Vietnam, if I hadn't come to Vietnam and was going to renew my contract, I was going to like push really hard to get Friday as a work from home day, because this was before COVID. It was really like quite, crazy to ask to work from home. But what I hated, I loved that job, but what I really disliked about it was like 8:30 to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. I'll be honest, I mean, I'd come in, turn my computer on, I probably wouldn't even check my emails till 10 o'clock. By Friday, I'd checked out at lunchtime. Like, I didn't work 40 hours, but I won awards at that job. I like completely revolutionized the fundraising, like did amazing things. So I hit all of my targets and some. in probably like half to 2/3 of the hours that I was paid for. And it infuriated me because I was like, I could get some of my life back here. Like if I can work from home on a Friday, I'll probably only work 4 hours, but it means I can sleep in a little bit. I can finish earlier. Like that job, I could have worked from home all week. Obviously, COVID has now completely changed that it's completely normal. And I know you've told me that a lot of your team, it's kind of flexible hours and hot desking, and it's all changed now, which is really exciting. So when I see somebody, normally a boomer, saying young people don't want to work, my first reaction is, no, they do want to work. They just don't want to do those jobs.
Yeah, if they want to work on something like they really want to. And the same thing that we are doing right now, are we working or not? That's the concept. That's the question. Are we working or not?
Not really. I don't get paid for this. But it helps my personal brand, which I have realized. You brought that up, and I'm like, I do think about things like that. Like, what's my personal brand? I don't really do any work about it, but I think about it.
Okay, this starts with my belief. I'm not sure because the brand exists even with or without you building it or not. You're creating a logo or not, you're creating a system or not, the brand still exists. Because the brand is the perception of how other people will see, how people will talk about you when you're not in the room. It's about how people will feel about you and what people are going to expect when you're going to show up.
I heard as well, personal brand is just another word for reputation. What's your reputation?
The brand is more about what we believe, how we communicate our belief to the world, and how we make that communication consistent by time. And it's not about creating a beautiful picture outside and try to convince people to buy in the concept, but it's about consistency. And brand expert is not about the person who can put in magic in things and beautify things. No, they help you tell your own story in a way that is much more compelling. And normally we don't really well aware of our brand that much. So the brand expert is helping you to bring out the best essence of yourself. Same with the business as well. So branding is not we try to bling thing. We try to not talking things that people want to hear, but more like we bring ourselves, we bring the true values out to the world, and by that people will perceive ourselves the way that we want to. We also perceive ourselves in that way. So I hold the belief. I'm an atheist. I don't have special belief, but I always believe in one thing is about kindness. I think I shared an article lately about kindness, and there are 3 kinds of kindness. The first kind is please, thank you, you're welcome, and let me help you. That's the first kind of kindness. Is the courtesy, is the basic things that we do to communicate, to create relationships in general. The second layer of kindness is about dignity. It's about the kindness where we can truly see people at who they are, and seeing that every people in the room, including me and you, we have story to be told. We have our inner perception of life, and we have dreams to be realized. And seeing that in the people is about compassionate. It's about seeing people with who they are and without judgment. And the third layer of kindness is about where you're going things beyond yourself, where you're doing things not for seeking for short-term benefits. It's about, like the examples when we do charity, where we do things that sustain, where we do things that we are creating values and impact without compromising the current values of a person. So that's one of my core beliefs. And I do believe that kindness, if we treat it the right way, not as a strategy, but as a way of life, then this world just become better and life just become better.
We're talking about life becoming better. One of your passions you mentioned was sustainability and how you want to help impact on the younger generation and future generations. What do you see as the future of Vietnam, and especially when it comes to sustainability? Because this country, I feel like, has a massive... One of my favorite words to describe Vietnam is juxtaposition. It's like 2 different things at the exact same time. So there's so many amazing things going on here in terms of sustainability. But then on the way here, I drive down the Mai Chi To highway and you just see plastic trash everywhere because people just throw it out the car window. So what do you see for the future of Vietnam in terms of that?
We have a long way to go.
I like your honesty on that. Not like, oh, no, we're good. No, we do.
I might say we have a long way to go because we are moving out from the not so good situation of economics change not so long ago. So yes, we have a long way to go, but I don't see much different. And I might say that we will take not that long as compared to other country previously, because right now we have the chance to be exposed to the world and be exposed to different mindset. And eventually people will come back to themselves and asking the right question. Once they are settled with their basic needs, like daily basic needs, then that's where the people keep asking themselves the question about what is the real meaning of life and the impact that they're doing. And plastic is just a small, very small example of life. And I'm not a plastic hater. Even that I say I'm much more into sustainability and all, but I'm not a plastic hater. And the mindset is just, we don't use plastic if we don't need to, and that's it. But that, I might say, yeah, we are on the way. And it eventually is about the final values that we delivered.
Well, I love what you said about Vietnam's things are happening faster. And that's my hope as well. Because when I see all that plastic trash as an example, I think I know the way Vietnam works. I think I do anyway. And one day I might drive down that street and it's just going to have gone overnight because Vietnam will make it happen. They'll mobilize like 200 young students or something. But right, tonight we're picking up all that trash and it will be gone. And I think that's one of the exciting things I love about Vietnam. Being here for the last 9 years is it's catching up with the rest of the world quickly. And so that means it's picking up a lot of good habits, like technology and green technology as well. And it's replacing some of those not so good habits as well. But it's a really exciting time as well. So what do you see as the future for Vietnam?
We are still that flexible. We are still that, I might say that not all the time being so well structured and all. But the future that I see for myself is a country where people is holding their smile, doing the things that they are doing.
Beautiful. And I have one last question that I used to ask at the end of every episode, and we're in season 11 now, and I completely forgot to ask people, and I was on my way here today, and I was like, I've got to ask this question. I used to ask this of every guest for the last 2 seasons, and it's, if Vietnam was a person, how would you describe it or describe them?
A very kind, friendly person who is welcoming all the guests coming to the house. Also very smart, very resilient, and committed to the things that they are doing.
And do you see it as a male or a female?
Wow, I don't have a gender in my mind, but nice question. Nice question. More like female because of the flexibility.
Most people have said that they see it as a female.
Really?
Yeah, but I guess it just has feminine qualities. Even one person gave a really funny example. They'd obviously thought about it, but they were like, the outline of Vietnam is like the curves of a female and things like that. And I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty true as well.
Yeah, the flexibilities as well. I might say, yeah, it's more like a woman.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jessie, for joining me on this episode of a Vietnam podcast. I can't believe we're in season 11 now. I really, really appreciate your time and your insights in this episode. It's been fantastic. And thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I appreciate it so much. As you heard me mention, we recently won our best interview podcast in all of Asia, which is absolutely incredible. And that's thanks to you tuning in. I wouldn't have been able to do it for 5 years if it wasn't for people like yourself listening and watching. It's really just absolutely incredible. I would have given up so much longer ago if it wasn't for people like yourself. So thank you so much. Don't forget, we have a community on Patreon now. So go to patreon.com/a Vietnam podcast and you can join in there. I post episodes early. We have a private chat. I'll invite you to special events that we do here in Saigon, or we're going to try and do some stuff online eventually. I'm going to get round to it, I promise. And obviously make sure to do all that stuff. Turn on the notifications, follow, subscribe from wherever you are. And the best thing that you can do for me right now is, please, if you know anyone that also has a passion about Vietnam, wants to learn more about this amazing country, please share this episode with them and I will be eternally grateful. So thank you so much, Jessie, for joining us, and thank you for tuning in. Cheers.
Thank you.